All right, this is the first of three presentations on safety, liability, risk management. I'm going to define some terms in this one and explain a few of the legal issues. Um, and if you think it's just about wood shop safety or metal shop safety, um, that's not true because it also extends to computer labs for cyberbullying, um, other things that can happen in a computer lab. And um, when I got my credential back in the 1980s, when safety was a part of my methodology class, and we were taught to protect ourselves, to cover our ass, quite frankly, and that if we did that, we would be protecting the students. And if you've looked at my Vita, you know that I got out of education, got back into it, um, and I came to Fresno State to teach manufacturing and computer networking, not teacher education, but took over the teacher education when um, the guy doing it died. Um, and it was a small class for years. And when it started to reach a broader audience and started getting a lot of the STEM movement behind it, I went back and said, let me see if my approach to safety is still valid. Um, Lo and behold, I looked at the latest books, and it's still pretty much the same way that you want to make sure that you follow the rules and prove that you followed the rules, and you will keep yourself and the student safe. And I'll say it now, and you'll hear me repeat this. Professionalism and record keeping is the best defense you have for keeping students safe. I'm going to take a second here to mention the references for this. A couple of years ago, ITEA came out with a book um, about safety in makerspaces and STEM labs. It's very good. You might want to try to get that. It's the National Organization for Technology Education at the um, K-12 level. Um, the other one is the basic textbook for this class, Advanced Teaching Methods for the Technology Classroom. It's a little bit older, and in fact, I think I have found a PDF of that entire book. Um, and if that turns out to be the case, I'll post it so that you can download it and look at it. It's still as good as anything I've seen recently. Now, the last part of this was my textbook when I took a class like this. Um, Teacher liability of school shop accidents. Obviously, a guy working on a doctorate went through and did case studies of all um, school shop accidents for about 3 decades. Fascinating reading if you can ever find it. It's out of publication. I've got one of the few copies of it. If you're ever in Fresno, I'll let you look at it um, because it's really fascinating. Okay, and as I say, we've been looking at this for a long time. There's the legal ramifications, which I'm going to cover in this presentation and defining some terms. Then we're going to go into professional practices. That's going to be in presentation two. I'm going to show you some of the tricks of the trade to um, do these kind of demonstrations and what you'll need to do, and record keeping. And in presentation three are the actual safety controls. That's the guards and other things that you might want to set up and how you might design your class and the projects. Okay, let's start with some terms. The popular term today is risk management. It's a little bit like we used to do what we're doing called it vocational education, but that fell out of favor. Now it's career technical education. And but risk management, it makes a lot more sense because um, it's not just safety risk. You've got emotional risk, financial risks, and risk management brings in compliance issues, but it does focus on liability, which which is how we've been looking at it for years, even though we called it safety. And the term safety really has to do with bodily injury, bodily, keeping the body protected, keep blood from flowing. I'll be using that as the example, even though emotional risk management for those computer classes where students may be downloading porn and getting around the firewall that your district is so proud of, um, those kind of things, those can come back to bite you later. Um, Going to a little kind of overview, a little history. Um, Up until the 1980s, every case that I've heard of was that made it to a court was settled for the teacher, and most of them still are. But the environment's a little different today. It's a litigation-happy world. Um, some parents are more involved than they would have been 20 years ago. You know, the helicopter parents, and um, we have administrators who were elementary school teachers now in charge of high schools, and they don't want their little babies to be hurt. Um, and as most of you are getting into this field a little differently, you haven't had the instructions for the classic method of that most people do. It's not that pathway is not going to come back. Are the students different? Well, I don't know that they're that much different. I'm not one who says, "Oh, the next generation are no good." There's some good and some bad. There always have been, but the students may be a little bit more aware. Um, I don't know. But it all comes down to negligence. If you know that there is a problem with something going on, some equipment, a process, and you ignore it, um, it's going to come back and bite you, quite frankly. Um, and I'm going to mention the term tort law because that's what the proper name for when civil suits go out there. It's covered under tort law. So I guess you don't really need to know that, but you may hear that come up um, if you get into discussions about this with other people. One of the other concepts for this whole approach toward safety and risk management is our duty of care. We all have some responsibilities, and we have our duty of care as instructors. The school systems and their administrators have their duty of care. The district owns the space, and they run it with their administrators. Um, but the district's duty of care extends to making a safe way for those students to get to school. As soon as that kid walks out the door on his way to school, the district has responsibilities to make sure that they're not passing through dangerous intersections, through drug dealing areas, that the buses are safe. Um, and so that's part of that duty of care. The parents have a certain amount of duty of care, and they need to be informed as to classes they're taking. The students should act appropriately. We're going to see where that comes into play in a little bit. But as the instructor, when that kid walks in your classroom, you are the adult in charge, and you have that responsibility to make sure that they're safe. If you have chairs that have broken legs and you let them sit on them, the kid's going to fall, and you're negligent if you don't either get the chair removed or replaced or repaired. Now, the organizations these days are more complicated than they were 20 or 30 years ago. The biggest thing in the last 20 years has been the American with Disabilities Act. Um, it, however, does not have any regulatory authority behind it. The three big national organizations are Occupational Safe and Healthy um, um, Administration, the Environmental Protection Administration, and the Department of Transportation. They are federal government um, regulatory agencies and can impose fines and make and require things to be done. And there are California equivalents for that. But other organizations like the National Fire Protection Association, which writes building codes and electrical codes, they don't enforce them. It is OSHA that enforces them, or DOT or EPA. And there's a whole bunch of other code councils and organizations that put out eye protection rules and all of this. Um, Take your pick of which rules you want to follow, but it is the big three that have regulatory power. Um, One thing that often comes up is, should I get the students to sign a statement of responsibility? I promise to be safe in this class. Well, um, here's one of the quirks here. When a student is under 18, um, that has absolutely no meaning. When they're under 18, it's the adults that are responsible for their safety. Now, at 18 years and 1 day, those people become suddenly, magically responsible. Um, it's a little weird, um, but you got to have a cutoff point somewhere. And I have my students sign a statement of responsibility because they're over 18. Um, but I also know that it won't hold up in court if there's some negligence. But it does, I find that it helps to put them on notice that they are responsible for their own safety. Um, so, have as part of the conversation about being safe in the class, it doesn't hurt to have them sign a statement of responsibility. Now, should you have the parents sign off on that? Well, it's equally useless even if the parent signs off on it, because the parent can't really control the kid when they're at school. Um, and but it is a good idea to let the parents know that the students are taking um, that particular class, and it's often from this early in the semester. Here's what your student's going to be doing in my class, and sign this so that they know what's happening in the class. To get it back is a good thing to do. Um, 2 years ago, I was visiting a class. It was a programming class, and in one of the high schools, and there was a kid in there who was not doing the things everybody else was doing. And I said, "What's going on?" I said, "Well, his parents um, found out that he was taking this class, which of course was using the internet a lot, using some of the programs on the internet to do the programming, and they came and became ballistic because they did not want their son to ever be on the internet." Yeah, go figure. And by the time they found out about it, through updates that the teacher sent out 3 or 4 weeks or a month into the class, um, it was too late to change his schedule, and so he just sat in the class and did his programming work out of a book. So it was a little bizarre, and the parents, if you got parents like that, better to find that out in the first week of class than 4 weeks into the class. Okay, let's get back to the safety part. There are two types of accidents: foreseeable and unforeseeable. Honest to God, that's how they're divided up. Um, Now, foreseeable, which I'll be talking about for the next few slides, is when you know that there is something that could be dangerous, a saw that could cut, whatever. Um, the unforeseeable, the courts actually kind of do a equivalent to in quality assurance. There's a 6 why analysis of a problem in production, and you ask 6 why questions, and each one of those you ask 6 more why questions, each one of those you ask 6 more why questions, until you've got bunch of possible why did this particular thing happen, and that's what they do. And the unforeseeables are the acts of God, and it's generally nothing that the teacher did that gets involved in that. I'll mention a little bit about that in a few minutes. And again, you want to be professional, and even those unforeseeables, you'll be given a pass on. Okay, there's 3 steps to deal with foreseeable accidents, assuming that you have identified what's foreseeable, and that's pretty easy to do. I'll get a little more detail on that later. But basically, it's classic educational theory. You give instruction, you make sure that they got the instruction, and you keep the records of it. Um, I'm going to go into some easy ways to do that in the next presentation. But let's look at these a little bit closer. The first step is the instruction. You want to show the proper use of the equipment. You can use videos, a combination of in person and on video. And what you want to do is show them the proper use of the equipment. Now, I'm not going to go into details of specific machines in here. I'll probably post an example test of a woodworking class, or maybe a welding class. I can't remember which one is the better one. But mostly you want to go to the operations manual for that piece of equipment. It's going to have a list of safety rules. Use that. And you want to show it, demonstrate it, and explain it. And it needs to be at their level. The explanation of how a saw works for an 8th grade class is going to be a little different than a 12th grade class. So try to get it at the level you know how to do that. And I will mention here that it's bad practice to show the wrong way to do something. You want to show them the correct way. Don't even tell them that there's a wrong way to do it unless it's something that you really need to make sure about. I don't know how we got away with it, but I knew a teacher who taught for 30 years. He taught woodworking, and he would, at the beginning of the semester, set up the table saw to do a kickback, which means that you're cross-cutting using the rib fence. He would hang a target on the wall behind the saw, do this kickback, try to hit the bullseye, and just to see what can happen if you do this. Well, everybody that knew him said, "How do you get away with that? If we did that, we'd have those kids trying to hit that target from the first day, and they would end up getting hurt." He got away with it. Not the way I'm going to do it, and I do not recommend showing them the wrong way or a dangerous way to use equipment. Okay, you've given them the instruction. This kind of intermediate step is to make sure that they all actually got it, and that is to take roll on the day you give that instruction. You're going to be missing a few students. There's always somebody absent, and so you need to have a way of being able to collect those students who missed the instruction and give it to them a second time. It's usually easier that time when you have the 3 or 4 students who missed. You can probably go through your safety demonstration in 1/5 of the time because it's a smaller group. But then you need to be able to check off to say they did get this instruction. Now, when you do your basic first run at the instruction, you can do it in one large group, you can do it in several small groups. That's going to be your style. Whatever works best for you, you need to make sure that they can all see it and understand it. Now, the last part of this to show that they got it, and that is that it's a test, a safety test on a specific tool, on a specific thing. It could be how to log in on the computer, make sure that they understand how the proper way to do these things. Now, the question often comes up is, what tools should I give them safety tests on? Well, as the professional, it's up to you to decide. If they're all going to use a tool and there is a foreseeable danger, give them a test. Um, but you can also have only advanced students can use certain tools. Um, if you're in a middle school class, you probably don't want the students using the table saw, but you might have a 10th grader who's assisting you in the class, and that kid has done enough woodworking to run that saw. Um, Give him a test or her a test, um, but then don't let him do all the cuts for the other students. Um, and if not all the students are going to use that thing, don't give them all a test on it, unless you want to just give some theoretical test about it. Now, the most important part of this is keeping records of the test. And I will be giving you some, you'll see a little bit later, some real quick and easy ways to do that. It doesn't involve computerization, although doing the test on a computer can be useful. But keep the records. Now, that unforeseeable, um, crazy things can happen. People can get hurt in totally unforeseen ways. Um, my favorite case study from that book of case studies was a drafting class. Now, back in the 70s, um, this was all done on drawing boards and sharp pencils and T-squares, very sharp pencils, special sharpeners to make these lead pencils very sharp. Well, class is working away on their assigned project, and another teacher comes up to the classroom and needs to talk to the instructor. So the instructor goes to the door, steps out, closes the door because they're going to be talking about something they don't want the class to hear about. And so he's legitimately out of the class. And you may have heard you can't ever leave your students. Well, that's not entirely true. Um, if they are in under control and you have to step out, that's not going to be a problem. Well, one of the kids in the class got frustrated, and whether he threw it or it slipped out of his hand, his pencil went to the into the wall and bounced back and landed in the eye of a kid a few rows over. Now, who could ever have foreseen that? He didn't maliciously throw it at the kid. All the other kids were witnesses. They saw it bounce around. Um, he could not have tried to target that kid on the ricochet. Um, the kid was known to be a little volatile, but he wasn't attacking another kid. And who could figure that it's going to poke a kid in the eye a few rows over? Um, and so once you go through those what ifs, what if, what if, what if, had the trajectory been 2 inches different, it would have gone past his ear. If it had been, the likelihood of it coming back into the level of where the other students were sitting is incredibly slim. Um, and so in the end, the teacher was not at fault. Would it have happened if the teacher had been in the classroom? Quite probably. This kid was known to get a little frustrated. He'd been known to throw some things before, not on a regular basis, not every time. He did it when the teacher was there. Um, and they said, sometimes things happen. And there, what are you going to do? Have the teachers, students now wear eye protection in a drafting class, or a day it would be in a computer class. That's a little outrageous. So it's just one of those very freak accidents, or the unforeseeable. And generally, the teachers are not found responsible for those because there's no negligence involved. It also comes up the question: should I get an insurance policy? Well, I don't carry one, never have. Um, if it makes you feel better, get one. You can get them through ITEA or CITA, it's the California Industrial Technology Education Association. Um, your homeowner's policy might protect you. Um, the thing is, and as you when I go through what happens when there is an accident, um, what will happen if you do have an insurance policy? The insurance company will likely say, "Oh, let's give them $10,000 and make them go away." Um, and it's like auto insurance. If you had an auto accident, you know that somebody's found at fault, and whoever's found at fault, um, their insurance company has to pay. And if you have high, if you have low deductibles or high deductibles, you have a minimal policy, the insurance company really won't go to bat for you. But if you have a policy that's a pretty good one, then they bring out the big guns and end up fighting it, and you may not end up having to pay. Is the likelihood of you ever having an accident in your class is very slim. In the 30 years that I've been doing this, over different places and different times, I've had one recordable accident as of this week. There may have been something that happened last class that I will see. Um, but one out of 30 years, and then it was a kid got his finger caught in a grinder and ground away his um, fingernail. Um, Very bloody, but not life threatening. Um, so, insurance policies don't relieve you of the responsibility. Just might make you feel better, and they're not very expensive, generally. Okay, so what I've kind of gone over so far, you're dealing with students under 18. You have a duty of care. Um, Started explaining professionalism and record keeping, which is the best protection to cover your ass. And if you cover your ass, you are keeping your students um, safe. And the basic approach is to instruct and demonstrate, make sure they got the information and they understand it. And then that part for foreseeable and unforeseeable accidents. You can't do anything about unforeseeable ones because they're going to come just crazy out of the blue. But if you see a problem, you need to address it. Um, there are a lot of things that are set up to um, be on the teacher side for this, and we'll go through it a little bit more in the next couple of presentations. But I'm trying to keep these about 30 minutes long. Okay, look for the next one next week.